Welcome back. To build more homes, you need infrastructure. So how are we doing? Here's a look at the state of it by the numbers. The Canadian Infrastructure Council has produced the first national infrastructure assessment. The news isn't good. In 2022, 11% of the enabling infrastructure for housing was listed in poor or very poor condition, with a replacement cost of $126 billion. Waste and wastewater systems top the list, with 11% of those assets in poor or very poor condition and a replacement cost of $107 billion. And a staggering amount of waste does happen. 17% of Canada's water gets wasted every year through leakage. 800 million litres. That's equivalent to a year of drinking water in the province of BC. Waste management systems are in slightly better shape, and the percentage of waste diverted from landfill has risen to 27% in 2022 from 21% in 2002. But landfill shortages are expected to be increasingly common. Public transit was in poor condition at a rate of 13% in 2022, with smaller cities faring worse than larger ones. That review of infrastructure comes from the first National Infrastructure Assessment. Peter Weltman is Vice Chair of the Canadian Infrastructure Council and a former Financial Accountability Officer for the province of Ontario. Peter, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with whether you were surprised by what you found. I mean, the state of infrastructure is not great. Was that a shock to you?
Well, it was. You never know how bad it is. I guess it was a little bit of a shock as to how bad it was, and the disparity amongst the different communities and the regions was also quite striking.
Of course, one of the reasons that this report is important is if we're going to build houses, we need the infrastructure to support it. When we look at the gap, does that make you less confident that we can meet housing targets? In other words, we need to put the cart before the horse.
Well, I think it's important that people recognize that we all recognize you need the cart before the horse. People kind of like to have water coming out of their taps when they move into a house and turn on the tap. That's a pretty key component. So I think it's important for folks, and I think people do recognize that the infrastructure is needed to support the housing, and it needs to be there first.
You know, one of the other things, and I guess maybe we just kind of get inured to big numbers, but I was actually pleasantly surprised at the size of the expected cost to upgrade. It was lower than I would have thought, actually, Peter, but would you agree with that assessment?
Well, I think at the moment it's not too bad, but the key issue is we don't have enough data to really get into the details around specific costs and specific benefits from investment. And that's really what the purpose of a national infrastructure assessment is to provide advice to the government as to where is the most effective investment, where should the next dollar be spent.
And so I guess that leads to the obvious question of what do you hope happens with this report? Who should use it? How should it be used?
Well, I think anybody who touches on infrastructure, so builders, municipalities, communities, at least have an awareness of what the state of play is. So what do we have in the ground now? What their community could look like in 25 years from now, and what sort of infrastructure will be required to support what that community looks like in 25 years. And of course, how do we get there? What are the costs, and what are all the different things we need to do to coordinate to move us in that direction?
You know, there obviously you broke it down into categories. Water, wastewater. I was actually shocked at the amount of waste and leakage in our system. When I look at that, if I were a municipality, I would consider that kind of a five-alarm fire. Did you see it the same way, that people should jump on this and actually fix what needs fixing?
Absolutely. And that's like the first recommendation. Make the most of what we have in the ground now, because that is the most cost-effective investment, the highest benefit, the highest return in the infrastructure space right now. And I was surprised. I mean, we remember the Calgary situation last year with the water leakage. I was surprised at how much per capita water usage there is in Canada, even in different regions relative to other parts of the world. Part of that can be explained by the fact that we have a vast country with lots and lots of stuff, and we're not as conscious of the fact that these things are finite resources.
And so if we're thinking about building housing, is it fixing existing infrastructure, or is it building new infrastructure, or is it a combination of both?
Well, and that's where an NIA comes in, and that's where you can drill down to a lower level. It's a combination of both. So typically a higher density housing area is going to be less expensive to service from an infrastructure point of view. Most of the infrastructure is already there. It's a matter of tweaking and adding and maybe making changes. If you're building brand new, low density suburbs further away from the city center, infrastructure has to be built to bring those services further out. And in fact, the property tax, the revenue, the fiscal situation doesn't allow a city to do that and break even. It's expensive to do that.
All right, we've got to leave it there, Peter. It's so good to have your time with us.
Sounds good. Thanks, Amanda.
Peter Weltman is Vice Chair of the Canadian Infrastructure Council. How we finance our infrastructure could also use some innovation. Ben Dorcas is Vice President of Outreach and Research at Clean Prosperity. Ben, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me on the show.
So there are big numbers and there are big needs here. Do we need to think about, because if you're a municipality, you don't have extra cash lying around to fix the stuff that's already under our feet. Where can we start to look for innovation when it comes to financing this?
Yeah. Well, the headline issue, whether we're talking about water infrastructure or electricity infrastructure, which are the two main kinds of housing-related infrastructure that municipalities are involved in, is that the upfront cost is being fronted too much by homebuyers and taxpayers, and that's what we fundamentally need to fix.
In other words, one of the things we've identified is that housing doesn't get built because the development costs are so high. This would actually help solve that. How do we go about that?
Exactly. So what municipalities, and especially in Ontario, are doing, and we're seeing this to a larger extent now in places like British Columbia, is that they're relying on development charges to finance a lot of the new construction of water and wastewater in particular. And this has been a great deal for cities because they don't have to take up the debt. And what that just ends up being is debt that ends up in household, at the household level, in their mortgages. So what we have to be thinking about is the debt's going to be taken out anyway. And so we need to be thinking about what's the right level at which we should be taking out this debt. Should we put onto the household through higher mortgage costs, or should we be putting it in at the municipal level, or even better, some sort of middle ground in which a municipality can still actually own the asset, but in perhaps a corporation that's owned by the municipal government that can take out debt without it being immediately a liability for taxpayers.
And how different is that than what happens now? If a municipality needs to invest in its infrastructure, it doesn't have the options to do that right now?
It does, but it's part of a political process where when you have water as a line item department, when it's up against parks and roads, what you see is less of a focus on what that water system needs. And so by creating a corporation where a board of directors and the governance is focused just on the water system and just what they need, we're going to see more growth. And that's modeled on a system that we have in place here in Ontario in pretty much every municipality, or at least the large ones, of electricity distribution. It's a good model. It's led to growth. And now we're in a position where we should be thinking about that for water. And now electricity has been growing, and now electricity needs to grow a lot too. And those corporations are well positioned to eventually grow, but with some financing changes there too.
And then go solicit investment. So we would have very specific, presumably municipal bonds related to these assets? Exactly.
You can get more debt, and you can do it in a way in which you think about a household. If you're a household, you don't think about the entire upfront cost of a home in terms of what you buy. You think about your monthly cost, your regular mortgage payment. That's not how cities are thinking. They're thinking about the big upfront cost of infrastructure. And what we need to do is rethinking that in terms of what's the right mix of how we finance it upfront, which is a little bit, and finance it with debt, which is a little bit too. We want to find that happy medium. And we're just not there in the municipal finance world, especially for water and wastewater.
And we're definitely going to have to get there. Ben, great to have you with us for this. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Ben Dorcas is Vice President of Research and Outreach at Clean Prosperity. Coming up, how Canada can build its biotech strength. Stay with us.